and she got an honorary Doctor of Science from the University of Connecticut. And we could go on and on and on. But I'm going to let you get to know her and start cracking some of those myths. So without further ado, please welcome Betty Shanahan.
Well, thank you, Monica, and let me add my thanks to Monica, Professor Gemmel, and everybody in UPE and CDM who's made today possible. And I believe that events like today are really critical to the success of women in technology. And you heard a little bit about my story, but I'm going to give you a little different angle. First of all, I'm not that different from you. So when, she gives me all these accolades, and I'm very, very honored to receive those. But I'm another woman like you, and I spent 24 years in industry where I was a very active member of the Society of Women Engineers as a member, doing my normal engineering job. And through that, I had a number of experiences that I'm going to share with you today. But then what happened is I had the opportunity to become the executive director at the society. You may not realize the Society of Women Engineers is actually headquartered in the Prudential Building. So 40,000 members worldwide, but the offices are in the Prudential Building in Chicago. And in the course of doing that, I started to uncover a lot of social science research. And in finding that, I realized that, first of all, there's a whole group of social scientists that make their careers out of studying us, and that a lot of what they have uncovered is actually extremely informative for all of us, and I'll try and share some of that. And make a particular call out for places like the American Association of University Women, who translate this research from social science researcher language into everyday people language, parents of children that might be interested in STEM, the women that practice STEM. So what I'm really doing is kind of bringing, through SWE, I was able to bring my experiences and some of the research I found together. And I really, with that, I am not a social scientist. So I'm going to acknowledge a number of different sources. These are just some of the ones I've used for today. But there is a wealth of research out there, and I think that's very empowering. And that I'm standing here, not with my own work, but standing on the shoulder of giants. I also want to set a few foundations for what I'm going to talk about today. Because social scientists will tell us that what we know and what we believe is guided by our life experiences. And our race, our class, gender, sexuality, and all these other elements of our identity shape our experiences differently. So I am going to be giving you one person's perspective. I happen to get the title Keynote Speaker, but that doesn't make my experience any more valid than your experiences. And also, everything I say may not apply to you. So if it applies to you, take it, but if it doesn't, that's fine too. I also want to point out that I'll talk a lot about differences in styles that you'll see in the workplace. Differences in styles are not differences in quality. I once had a man come after me after I was speaking and said, "You make it sound like women are dripping in righteousness." And it's like, oh no. We can be catty with the best of them. But, and I don't intend to say that. Styles aren't right or wrong. Where the right or the wrong comes in is how they preclude people from contributing, how they preclude people from participating. And I also never, ever, ever want to intend to be male bashing. Men are our partners in advancing all diversity in engineering. As a matter of fact, I added this quote that I'll use the National Center for Women in Information Technology a lot, NCWIT. If you don't know NCWIT, go to their website, full of wonderful material. And they're spending a lot of time looking at intersectionality. And so I grabbed a quote from them saying, "Achieving equity in the tech industry must be intersectional. Understanding differences and experiences critical to promoting diversity, inclusion, and change for women, girls, and other underrepresented groups in IT." I'm going to have kind of a narrow focus here today, but don't let the narrow focus preclude that really for advancement, technology needs to include everybody, however they identify. So then I'm going to start with the story. This is Isa Wenger Ancheli in 2015. So it's a subway poster in San Francisco. So much like you may see, hopefully those of you who aren't from DePaul see our posters up in the subway and on bus stops. Her company, One Login, was doing a big recruiting campaign. So they had a whole set of these profiles, these pictures of their employees who they say, want to work for me. Here's a little quote from one of the employees. Well, what happened is a photo of this ad went viral with people criticizing One Login for using models instead of real engineers to promote their company. So ISIS responded with this tweet and the hashtag, "I look like an engineer." Well, her response led to 140,000 tweets in 5 days. And with this very rich, diverse view of people saying, "I look like an engineer." And I think what happened to her is a very visible example of what happens to women, people of color, GLBTQ, people with disabilities every day in technology, just not as visibly. But I think one of the big takeaways of the outcome of this is that there is a huge, rich community of people who are all experiencing something every day that says they don't belong. So one part is a moral argument. Everybody has the right to contribute. And if you feel like there's a time where you're alone, know that in 5 days there were 140,000 people who said, "I feel like you do," and you're not alone. And secondly, there's a societal argument. Even if you want to ignore the moral argument, we need everybody to contribute in technology. So my themes are why and how we should have women in technology. So the themes are going to be diversity matters. There is a reason for diversity beyond just the moral argument. I'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges of participation and advancement that I and people I know have felt as moving ahead in technology. And then looking at sometimes what are the realities of what we have to do to be effective. Because there are times where you will not be authentic, but you will do something that's effective. But at the same time, the value of being authentic and how we don't want to forget that. But the real theme of today is the ultimate definition of success is written by you. It's not going to be written by me or anybody else. And I think one of the things that's so exciting about our panel this afternoon is we have a panel that comes from a variety of backgrounds. You're going to see very different definitions of what is success. And hopefully you'll learn from each of us something, but I think the most important thing you can learn from all of us collectively is you define what is success for you. So with that, let's talk a little bit about the value of diversity to innovation. So working with the assumption of the folks in tech are crucial to innovation. But I've talked to an artist already. So there's anyone from any field is creative, innovative, you require diversity. Why diversity? Well, first of all, in technology, we're serving a very diverse global marketplace. I heard a great anecdote from an executive at Whirlpool, the appliance manufacturer. And the exec was talking about that they were putting out a new dishwasher. They're really excited because they had these really innovative controls. They're very different. So the all-male team brought out those innovative controls and found out that if you have long fingernails, that you can't use them. Without any women on the team for an appliance, which I tend to think maybe gets a little more used by women than men, could not be used because of the fingernails. Such a simple fix that by having some diversity on the team. Of course, retain and recruit the best talent. For those of you in technology, you've got an amazing career ahead of you. Your talents are so in demand. And as a nation, as a planet, we do not have enough people working in technology. So you want to be able to retain people. But in the end, a big part of creativity is just the value of differences. That you get better decisions if you have different people that are bringing different kinds of perspectives, a different way of thinking about things, new ideas. Someone that says, why do we always do it this way? Do we have to do it this way? And if you start to challenge the assumption, maybe you don't always do it this way, you start to focus more on facts and delve more into those facts, getting up with better decisions. You think different ways, come to problems a different way, and communicate in different ways. And all of this comes together to really build stronger, better solutions. And I want to share this. This is a great new campaign that NC Wit, you're going to be so tired of hearing me say NC Wit when I'm done, but a whole campaign about the idea you don't have is the voice you haven't heard. Bill Wolf, who was the president of the National Academy of Engineering, actually was president of MIT during some of the big advances for women faculty at MIT. But while he was president of the National Academy of Engineering, said, as a consequence of a lack of diversity, we pay an opportunity cost, a cost in designs not thought of, in solutions not produced. He said, if the solution to cancer is in the brain of a little girl, it may never come out. So this is the real value here to technology of all of us participating, is that innovation will bring. But if you look at what technology is like, our voices can be many of those voices that should be contributing are rather soft. Now I picked this picture, I'm picking on IEEE, and I was IEEE member for decades, and they're a wonderful organization. They do a lot for women in engineering, so I'm not intending to pick on them, but their slide is, I think, so represented. This is from a couple years ago, their first conference on the rebooting of computing. And it really reflects what the industry is like in computing. Very few, and this is an international group, but yet the challenges of women in technology is not limited to the United States. It's something that transcends borders. And a little bit of the numbers there to just kind of back up what I was saying. 57% of bachelor's degrees in 2017 went to women, but only 19% of those went to, of computer science bachelor's degrees went to women. When you look at the workforce, not only is only 26% of the computing workforce women, but very small participation from women of color. 3% African American women in computing workforce, 6% Asian women, 2% Hispanic women. So all these voices that are not part of the workplace. So with that kind of basis of where we're coming, with what the industry is like, what college is like, I'm going to turn now to talk a little bit about some of what I had learned that I think can help shape how we look at ourselves, and what Monica's saying, how we address this. And I'm going to start talking a little bit about implicit bias. Most of you heard of implicit bias? I think it's getting more, yeah. And basically, typically people look at prejudice and discrimination as being something intentional. And I guess sadly, maybe it's more intentional than I realize now that, with some of the current social dialogue, some of the comments that are becoming prevalent in society. But very, very often, the people we're dealing with when we're working with are not intentionally or consciously discriminating. It's actually it's the exception. And what psychologists will tell us is that all of these biases are outside of our awareness and our conscious belief systems. Basically, all of us are a product of our society. And all of us are carrying biases. So they exist within well-intentioned people. And actually, men and women often share the same biases simply because we're socialized together. And one of the most profound things to do, and it's a little tough to do, is take the implicit association test at Harvard. And it really helps you start to recognize that I may think I don't carry biases, but actually I am just as much a product of my society and my upbringing as anybody. So what do these biases mean? What do they lead to? Well, Catalyst has done a wonderful report that was called Women Take Care, Men Take Charge, and looking at leadership. They looked at 14 attributes of leadership. So if we said, what are the things we'd want in a good leader? Well, one strong, decisive, nurturing, communicative. So there's all great attributes of leadership, but you can gender those attributes and you can actually kind of categorize them into taking charge, being decisive, or taking care, being emotional. And when women exhibit take charge attributes, they may be viewed as competent, but they're not liked. And when women take care, they are liked, but they're not viewed as competent. So the challenge for women leaders is, am I going to be competent or am I going to be likable? And so often when you think about who do we want to lead our organization, it's those take charge attributes. So these stereotypes work against women, and they're stereotypes not just the men have, but women have. Some of the other challenges are just the culture that we're in. And we're often in a culture that doesn't even realize it's inhospitable. You know, they say a fish doesn't understand water, and to some extent, a majority doesn't understand its culture. So we say we're inclusive, we say we welcome everyone to live in our environment, to live in our culture, not a blend, not their culture, not a blend of our cultures, but my culture. And a very, very powerful realization of this back when I was at the Society of Women Engineers. We were working very hard in the diversity of our own leadership, not only gender diversity, but racial diversity and LGBTQ, women with disabilities. We should be demonstrating what we're arguing for. So we had some very intense, multi-day, very large diversity training for top leadership. And in the course of doing that, we broke into groups by identity. So I was in the group with the straight white women without kids, and we were all supposed to talk about something that we wanted the rest to know. And after my group spoke, one of the African American women said, "You didn't speak anything about being white. You didn't speak anything about not being a parent. You spoke about being a woman. We're all women." And that's when it hit like a ton of bricks, that we did not understand our culture because we were the majority in the society. And that's one of the real challenges of creating an inclusive culture, is understanding how to be inclusive. And then organizations are also challenged with what I've seen called the illusion of inclusion. A small number of diverse individuals do not make an inclusive environment. Especially when that small number of diverse individuals are not in decision-making roles, are not in leadership roles, are not in roles of influence. So I think it's very quick to say, oh, we've got 3 of those, so our diversity initiative's successful. But in reality, who has the power? Who has the opportunity to speak? Who represents the organization? And when you live in this environment, I think one of the things you end up struggling with what gets called isolation. This isolation is basically not a big thing. It's lots and lots of little things. It's something that says every day, you don't belong. So, for example, protection for jobs that are considered a risk for a woman, but an opportunity for a man. I had a chance to be visiting with a major tech company back in my SWE days, and they were talking about how they were looking for a new vice president, and there was somebody internal where they're like, oh, we've been grooming her, but what if she doesn't work out? And they took a total risk on somebody from the outside. They were protecting her from failing, but you don't get ahead in industry by being protected from failing. You get ahead in industry by taking risks. Little things, rewards and social activities are male-oriented. When I worked for a local tech company, and at every trade show we went to, or every sales meeting we went to, we'd go out for beer and pool. And it was technology company, almost all men. So one day I organized the women to go out to a place with tablecloths for dinner and have a nice dinner with a glass of wine. You don't eat standing up, you eat sitting down. And there was this big brouhaha about why I'm pulling all the women away. And it's like, everything you do is targeted this way. I think it made a little wake up that maybe we can have a variety. I heard the first female fellow at IBM was given a tie tack, for hold your tie, because they never had a woman. And then things like sitting in a meeting, apologies are made to me for swearing. Why, and when I'm the only woman in the room, am I the only one that's disturbed? Or first of all, how do you know I'm disturbed by swearing? And secondly, why don't you think some of the men are disturbed by swearing? Or I'll handle the logistics, or I get spoken over. Or I have a manager that will say, oh, I'm not going to, well, they talk about actually risk for early career. Risk-averse managers is one of the biggest challenges for people who are underrepresented, because early career people work for a first-time manager. First-time managers are told, don't be late with the project, don't mess up the budget. So who are the most risk-averse people on the planet? A first-time manager. So they're, don't be late, don't mess up the budget. So someone comes up and says, I want to go to an NC WIT event. I want to go to a Society of Women Engineers event. It's going to cost travel and she's going to be out of the office. No. Very often, those managers won't do something that they see as different because they don't have a framework to work in. So many of these things start to come together, and every single incident may seem trivial. Any single thing you talk about may not be a big deal, but it's when it's taken collectively and experienced regularly that it tends to alienate women. And Virginia Valiant out of Hunter College did a lot of research in this area, and she says that often once you bring up one of these incidents, someone will say, don't make a mountain out of a molehill. But she says a mountain is actually thousands of molehills piled one on top of another every single day until it grows to be a mountain. And for me, when I started, I was the first woman at Data General. This didn't come out very clear, but this is our group. That's me. The only other woman in the picture is our department secretary, and it's all white men. And at that time, I was feeling very much like I don't belong. I'm out of sorts, it doesn't fit. And my husband, of 41 years, we were newlyweds at the time, said to me, oh, you're just imagine a thing, it's all in your head. The hardware guys don't like the software guys anyway, And I was a hardware guy, but he was a software guy, so he had his chip on his shoulder. And I started to feel like there was something wrong with me. There was no legitimization of my feelings. And then, but just about the time this picture was taken, I went to an event that the Society of Women Engineers Boston and the MIT Women's Alumni Association put on. And someone said to me, said to us as a group, not just me, us as a group, as a class, you are a freak, you are different than everyone else. And it is okay to feel that you don't belong. Because you don't. It was so wonderful because for me, it meant there's nothing wrong with me. There's something wrong with the environment I'm in. And I think a big part of being successful here is just being aware. It's the environment, it's all these other factors. And you have control on how you respond to them. So, literally thinking of awareness as the antidote for fitting in this culture. I'm going to talk about a few different studies that get a little different angles at this. And some of them have been around for quite a while. One of them is stereotype threat, stereotype boost. And what's Aronson and Steele did this work looking at how people internalize their behavior, internalize popular stereotypes that are out there, and they respond based on those stereotypes, to the point that they have done studies where you take Asian girls, Asian American girls, divide them into 3 groups. Group 1, you stress they're Asian American. The middle group, you just talk about something random. Group 3, you stress they're girls. And then you give them a math test. The stereotypes of Asian Americans is that you're good at math. The stereotype of girls is you're not good at math. They can get statistically different results from how the girls that are otherwise equivalent perform on the test based on what stereotypes you remind them of before they go into the test. And all of us carry all these stereotypes inside us. But what the work in stereotype threat says is actually just by being conscious of the fact that this stereotype exists and it's bogus can help you inoculate yourself against the stereotype threat. And hence I always mention it. Okay, now my favorite topic, the imposter syndrome. And Monica's smiling because I went to an imposter syndrome workshop, 2-day workshop through the Society of Women Engineers in early 80s. And this stuck with me my entire life. And probably one of the things I should have said when I did my introduction is just because I know this stuff doesn't mean I practice it all the time. So this is like a therapy session for me to remind me of all of this. So all of this is kind of challenging to deal with, but I think this is so powerful. So this is Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes looked at it in the 70s on high achieving women. They were looking at women that were at the top of their field. And they found out that these women were unable to internalize their accomplishments. So any proof that they were successful or intelligent, they dismissed. Diplomas, awards, promotions. To the point one woman was like top in her class for the bar exam, or top in her state in the bar exam. She said, well, Rhode Island's a small state. I mean, just not accepting these acknowledgments. But instead said any success was credited to luck, perseverance, timing, and basically fooling others. I fooled my kindergarten teacher, I fooled my professors, I fooled my bosses, and this house of cards is about to come down when people find out I'm an imposter. I'm not as good as they say. So what does this mean? Well, for the women it means they don't enjoy their successes and they don't seize opportunities. Remember, I said you get ahead in industry by taking risks, but you don't seize those opportunities. And instead overwork to compensate for the deficiencies. I'll just stay later, I'll take another class, I'll get another degree just to try and make up for what I see as my deficiencies. Not only is this harmful to the women, but look at the lost opportunities to employers, to academic institutions, when individuals do not seize opportunities. This has been very much studied with graduate students, where actually the person who ran my workshop, the very first workshop I attended, and I've actually hired her to teach workshops in this, said there was a whole group of them as graduate students, and they came together and realized that rather than being excited about what they had received in terms of fellowships and that, all of them were feeling like imposters. Now, one of the things about the imposter syndrome I should note is that as research has continued, they found that, first of all, the imposter syndrome does impact men also. So the initial research was on women, but it's much broader than that. But what's I think important for us today is, first of all, it impacts women more than men, and it tends to be more intense in women than it is in men. And these are all on average, but on an average. But I think the important thing in the male-dominated culture is the symptoms you exhibit through the imposter syndrome actually have impact when interpreted from a male perspective. So what are those imposter syndrome symptoms? First of all, focusing more on weaknesses rather than strengths. So I want everyone to think about, when's the last time you couldn't fall asleep? Was it? So were you thinking about, man, I aced that exam and I am feeling so good that I can't sleep? Or, did you think about 3 weeks ago I said something really stupid and I can't, and the person I said it to forgot it 13 seconds after I said it, but 3 weeks later I'm still focusing on it? You don't ask for the necessary resources to do the job. I can do it. Monica, go cure cancer. Okay, Betty, I'll go do it tomorrow, And when I took this class, I took it with a friend of mine, Judy Nitch, and Judy and I have been friends since the 80s. And Judy has the largest woman-owned business in Massachusetts, or actually she's retiring from it, major civil engineering firm. At the time we took the class, she was a partner at a civil engineering firm. And in the class, they told the story of a woman who was asked to turn around a failing portion of a company. So this was happening in Massachusetts. She was driving in incredible traffic, long distances, to try and go back and forth, manage her family, do all the work at the facility. And basically, to make a very long story short, had to drop out. She was not able to sustain that. The next person who was offered the opportunity was a man who said, okay, I'll do it, but I need to be put up in a hotel the whole time I'm down there. I'm going to need 2 assistants. I'm going to need. And they said, okay. So Judy's a partner at this firm. A couple weeks later, her firm says, we want you to go down and work in the Rhode Island office for a while. So Judy remembered this, and she says, well, I need to stay in a hotel down there. It has to have a swimming pool because I swim. I need to have an assistant. And she calls me up, she says, it worked. They gave me everything I asked for. She said, without thinking about it, she would have been doing the crazy commute driving. She would have been trying to do it all on her own. Need to ask for the resources to do the job. The other is self-defeating attitudes in speech. And I think this becomes a real challenge when women are talking to someone who doesn't talk the same way, or in a group where the majority doesn't talk the same way. So I may come in and say, I don't know, I have this idea, maybe it'll work. What's often heard is, she doesn't know if it'll work. Where the counter is, this is how we're going to do it. This is great. And similarly, don't take credit for accomplishments. When I took this imposter syndrome workshop, I was at a startup. We're getting a little bit bigger, but I was at a startup, and I was one of a couple project leads reporting to the vice president. The vice president was going on his honeymoon, so I was supposed to go on vacation shortly before this workshop, and the vice president said, Betty, I want you to be acting VP while I'm gone, and put off your vacation, take it when you come back. So I said, okay, this is great. Now everyone assumed this one person, Stan, would of course be the leader, so I was kind of surprised by everybody that it was Betty, not Stan, including a lot of surprise by Stan. So when So Rich was gone for 2 weeks. I'm running the organization. I'm killing myself. I am working so hard. Things are going really, really well. And I did have some challenges because I had Stan lobbing a lot of grenades during the whole process. It's time. It's the end of this 2-week period. It's literally the day before the Imposter Syndrome workshop. And the head of software comes in and he says, Betty, I have to tell you, you've done a great job. I've really enjoyed working with you. It's been wonderful. So you know what I said? It was nothing. Everybody helped me. And it's like, no, Stan wasn't helping me. And I was killing myself. You know what the answer to when someone says something like that? Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, I appreciate you noticing. Yeah. Now, one thing I do want to say with the imposter syndrome and these attributes is, as much as I portrayed them this way, there's a flip side to this, which is, if you work for me, wouldn't you like to hear that I'm giving you credit for supporting? If you were someone that was helping make this happen, don't you want to hear about it? If you have an idea and I said, I'm not sure, don't you feel more welcome to throw in your idea? Don't you feel more welcome to modifying my idea? Don't you think that some of these attitudes and approaches and styles make for a better team? And I think one of the important things when we look at things like the imposter syndrome is to consider, first of all, how it is limiting us when others hear it, but also not throw the baby out in the bathwater and think about how it's being authentic to who we are enhances our ability to bring teams together and get projects done. Now, with one last thing with the imposter syndrome that I have to share. I saw this right after this work. I was supposed to do this session, or actually started to do this session last year when the university got closed. So I found it right afterwards. I'm like, okay, if I do this again, I'm going to include this. This, you know, the most interesting man in the world? You guys familiar with him? So. Yeah, you can't see it. It says, I don't always get compliments on my knitting, but when I do, I point out every single mistake. Yeah, and I think that's, you know, very often who we are. I thought that was so funny. So I told you about my friend Judy. Judy and a third friend, Pat, and I got together, and I had woven a baby blanket for Pat's grandson. And I'm a beginning weaver, maybe an advanced beginning weaver. And I wasn't going to give the baby blanket to them, and Pat insisted that I give her the baby blanket. And I'm like, well, look at all this, and look at all this. And Judy's like, the baby's going to spit up on it. It's a great baby blanket. Okay. So one last bit of research to talk about is some work that Joanne Martin at Stanford did on authenticity, and starting to lead back to being who we are and being authentic. There's a great quote from this woman in a tech company. It takes too much energy to pretend to be someone other than you are. They were advising me to be less open, less participative, less cooperative, to be not the way I am. It was a real dilemma to me. So much of the challenge that we're talking about with isolation and that is also when you start to take on behaviors to try and speak up, to try and get your points across. To be more aggressive, often it's not comfortable and it's not authentic. And these inauthenticity problems are actually heightened in minority women. So one of the challenges of this is women quit. And there's been work out of University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee looking at why women leave actually engineering, and very much gets tied to combination of culture and not being able to be authentic. So much of what happens is fix the women. We're going to teach you how to negotiate. We're going to teach you how to act like men. We're going to teach you how to speak up. And you learn skills, but the authenticity problems remain intact, so the dropout rates change. So really, so much is about creating cultures, and especially for those in the room who are more senior, who have the opportunities to start to create the cultures that everybody can be authentic. And I'm just talking about gender, but you can apply this to ethnicity. You can apply this in so many ways where people cannot fully contribute because they don't feel authentic. And basically, if we turn into straight white men in high heels, we lose the value of diversity. And being who we are is where the real value of diversity is. So let me kind of wrap up with just a couple of tactics and secrets. First is really starting to acknowledge others from underrepresented groups instead of assuming competition. I feel like our culture very often makes you feel like I'm competing for just one or two spots for the minority candidate, as opposed to I'm competing with everybody in the organization for everything. And I really enjoyed hearing about this from a friend of mine who retired as an executive at Boeing. And early in her career, she said she was in competition with this other woman, and they were just always competing, always competing. And one day, the two of them sat down at lunch and said, there's probably room for two women at the top in Boeing. Why are we fighting with each other? We should be competing with the whole company. So often, it's made to feel like we're not competing for everything. So if that's the case, let's support each other. Acknowledge others in the room. It's okay to sit with the other woman. It's okay to sit with the other person of color, or anyone that's different from the majority. Often, too, when you find you're in a situation where your words don't get heard. Very often, I feel like that when you bring those different perspectives, the easiest way to respond is to ignore you. I used to joke it was the get smart cone of silence. Like my mouth would move, but nothing would get into anyone's ears. And so often I think that's because you bring a different perspective. When I was working at a company called Inso, it's now part of Oracle, we were closing a facility in Vancouver. And I was the diversity of the leadership team there. So in the course of talking about closing this office, I said, well, it's in Canada. Is something, going to be different, like a different culture in Canada? And people looked at me like, is she making noise? Totally ignored the whole thing. Well, guess what? We had a disaster on our hands. We approached closing a facility and laying off people as we do in the United States, and it's not the same in Canada. I had the key, but the point got lost. If someone said, Betty, what do you mean by that? What do you think could happen? They didn't agree with me. They didn't disagree with me. They just legitimized the point and turned it into a discussion. Or if Denise says something one week, and the next week it comes back in somebody else's idea. Oh, Denise, that sounds just like what Denise said the other day. Denise, what do you think of that? You're not agreeing with anybody, but you're putting their name to the idea. You're turning their points into discussions. Don't wait to be invited. Seek out promotions, visible assignments, and being in the right group. And the right group depends upon what your definition of success is, where you want to go in the organization, or if you want to move around the organization. Men, but there's a great book called Women Don't Ask. And it pretty much looked at the fact that women don't ask for opportunities. And it's like, why do all the male graduate students get the prime opportunities? They come in and they ask the professor. So ask for what you want. Make your manager aware, or your advisor aware of what you're interested in. It's okay to say no. You don't have to do everything. So when I worked for Rich, he said to me, and I had a wonderful relationship with Rich. In the 6 years I worked for him, I got one review. And when I first worked for him, I said, I didn't know how I'm doing. He said, if you're not doing well, I'll yell at you, otherwise you're fine. So, but one time he said to me, I want you to write the letters N and O on a piece of paper. And when someone calls you up and asks you to do something, I want you to read the piece of paper. Because I was on every committee and on every group, and I was just spread so thin. And by being spread so thin, I wasn't able to focus. It's okay to say no in the right places. Participate in forums like this. Be mentors and sounding boards and support for each other. Because as you can tell, I think one of the most important things is to realize you're not alone, you're not different, and then you don't feel, everybody else who experiences what you do feels similar ways that you do. And I'm just going to give you a few career secrets here. And I would like our faculty in the room to close their ears now. Because the journey is sometimes long and difficult. And you know, I get the opportunity to stand up here and hear a group of a bunch of successes. But you know what? I really struggled when I was first in college. I can tell you I cried over more than one report card. Calculus, I made it through, but man. I'm first generation. My parents are immigrants. So when I first, so I had no models of even how to study or what to do in college or how to ask for resources. There are lots, if you're struggling, DePaul is full of resources. And for those of you who are visiting DePaul, I'm sure where you're coming from, is full of resources. Use them. I didn't use them. So it was really my senior year before I really figured out how to study. But you know what I did? I found success in my concentration classes. And I would have dropped out of engineering if it was not for Wendy Baker, who was our Society of Engineers staff advisor, and my advisor as a student. And she encouraged me, even though I was struggling, to keep going. And it led to an amazing career. So, faculty can now start listening again. But if you're getting A's, go for it. More power to you. But if you're not, don't give up. If only give up if you don't want to do it. But if you want to do it, don't give up. And once you get to if you're early in your career, once you get to your concentration class, it get a lot more interesting. When you get to work, as opposed to school, in work you don't always have to get an A. But the difference is, it's an open book exam. You can ask for help, you can ask for resources, you can look up information. So it's a very different dynamic than in school. It's not a take a test or do a project and get a grade. It's ongoing. And to recognize that your employment value extends far beyond your technical expertise. And what you bring as you, no matter what it is adding to your value as a technologist, as an employee, as a contributor to innovation. So then I'm going to show you my last quote. This is Grace Murray Hopper. I've had the honor of meeting her twice during her life. Once when I was a student at Michigan State, and then when she retired from the Navy, she was in Massachusetts, so we were from there. She was the developer of COBOL. She's the one that came up with the term a bug for a computer bug, because it literally was a moth in the computer. But she's got amazing wisdom and insight in management. And one of her quotes is, if it's a good idea, go ahead and do it. It's much easier to apologize than it is to get permission. And I took that quote to heart through my entire life, and through my entire career. And one time I was with Rich on a trip, very rare that we traveled together. We were sitting on the plane, he says, you know what I like about you? You always do something. I'm feeling pretty good. He says, don't always do the right thing, but you always do something. Like, no, I don't know if I'm feeling pretty good or not. But then he went on to say, even if you're doing the wrong thing, you start down a path. If it's wrong, you turn around and pick a different path. And I told him about this quote. I said, I always take the attitude, if it's easier to ask, if it's easier to apologize than get permission, just go do it. So take her words to heart. So with that, why does this matter in the end? Well, it goes back to some of the important problems we have to solve. I put up here the grand challenges of engineering that the National Academy of Engineering put together at the beginning of the century, looking at some of the really major problems that we're facing. And you know, the health, happiness, and safety of humanity is really dependent upon the innovation that's going to come out of your generations and your work. As technologists, you'll be tackling some of these grand challenges. And as technologists, you'll be tackling some fun things too, like giving people a fun video game to play with, or giving them some interesting entertainment. But what you're going to be doing in your careers is going to be improving the lives of people. You can be on the front lines, solving some of these big problems, or as very was true in my career, 7 layers back, doing some innovation that fed another, that fed another, that fed another, that made a difference. No matter where you are in that spectrum, you are going to be making a difference. So your success, your ability to fully contribute is critical. So with that, I wish you success, because it really does matter. Thank you. Take some questions. Any questions?
So
We also are going to have a great panel
I'll let
too.
you run your questions, but just raise your hand, and if they're soft spoken, if you could repeat the questions so
Okay.
everybody can. So go ahead. Anybody have questions for Betty?
Well, I do. I mean, first I thought your presentation was amazing, and the points that you bring up is that they're just so, for lack of a better word, very diverse, right? So one, when I think about just the whole concept of not even knowing that this study of imposter syndrome was back in the 1970s, I find that actually incredible. But when you think about it, like, do you see that, especially as women of color, I mean, what is really your take on actually having that change make a difference? Like, where's that change coming from? Because if it started back in 1970, and even now, and getting ready to go into a whole new decade, what are your thoughts on actually real change?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I was speaking with Monica. When Monica and I get together, it's bad news because we just start talking and talking and talking. And I was saying to her, she says, okay, first woman, only woman, there's so much of that. I think in many ways it's harder for you now than it was for us then, because I literally had men come up and say they didn't want to work with me. I had a technician tell my boss he refused to work with me. So I know where I stood. I think the challenge now is it's much more subtle. So, and I think the subtlety is some of the challenge all of you will face, because you don't have it so blatant of whether someone's going to be a challenge, or if someone says, I want to work with you, it's, there's kind of bucking a trend. But this is a journey. It's a long journey. And one of the things I really felt when I would position the Society of Women Engineers is there's 2 parts. Part 1 is empowering women. But the other part was advocacy. Advocacy to corporations, advocacy to universities, because they're the ones that control the culture. And this talk wouldn't have to happen if there was truly an inclusive culture. So it's attacking the journey on both parts. And that's where I think it's really important that, first of all, we support each other through this, but also as more and more people, I'm going to say, because I'll acknowledge that men from the majority can also contribute as they have more opportunities to impact culture from a leadership role. And not to forget where you come from if you are coming from a minority position into a leadership role. Yeah. And to, what was Madeleine Albright says, there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. To start to change that culture. So, do I have an easy answer? No, it's like changing society. But you know, we can make, each of us can make a change, and we can turn it into like a Ponzi scheme where, you know, we get other friends. The quote on legitimizing a talking point, that came out of, I should have credited it, came out of Cheryl Francis. She was CFO at R.R. Donnelley at the time, and I've repeated that. So, you know, hundreds of people have heard me say it. If all of us start to slowly make that journey, but I don't want to be Pollyanna too and say there's a silver bullet, because there isn't. But I think that's a good topic for group conversation too. Yes.
In 1975, when I was in the MBA program, there was a Virginia Slims ad, a cigarette ad. Come a long way, baby. And I cynically said, yeah, and we've got a few million light years left to go. I have mentioned a number of times recently that I never thought, first of all, I didn't think of even being alive in 2019. We didn't trust anybody over 30 back in those days. But we still have a few million miles left to go. Can you speak to what you see coming in the next 20, 30 years and how we're going to get there?
Boy, that's a big question. But I don't know if I can speak to what's going to come as much as where I have real faith is I have real faith, because I'm closer to your age than the average age in the room. I have real faith in the generation that's coming up now too. You are the most diverse generation. I think you're the most open to different experiences. I'm involved in esports here. I think this is so cool because not only is it, you know, fun for our students to be gaming, they make friends around the world through games. So where I'm hoping is that we see the attitudes change as this generation really takes some of their experiences and brings them into corporate America and brings them into the faculty and staff in universities and into government. You know, I could do a whole talk about people in technology and government. We have people running this country who do not understand technology. So if anyone ever wants to go into government, you go for it. But in terms of that big broad question, wow, that's a whole group discussion. Yes.
Well, first of all, my name is Shelley Wilson. I am the founder of an early stage sports tech platform. This has been quite a daunting track for me because I am doing this in the second half of my career space. So I mean, your talk today spoke volumes because both worlds I'm navigating are male-dominated fields. But esports is a wonderful, inclusive space for all. But as you know, women, there's still a lack of women in that space. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to hope to talk to you later about, you know, why DePaul. I mean, because there's only a few universities that have the privilege of bringing esports to the university. So I just wanted to say for my other questions, I'm going to defer them if I can at a later time. But I thank you.
If I can take one advantage, Naveen, could I talk to you to just say what happened yesterday or the day before?
Please do.
Yeah, so my name is Naveen. I'm a graduate student here. I'm also a graduate assistant at the Office of Health Promotion and Wellness at DePaul. And I lead the VINIVAL, which is the Bystander Intervention program at DePaul. So we not only discuss bystander intervention, but sexual assault, consent, and things of that nature with leaders on campus. So leaders would include resident directors, they would include athletes, and also just yesterday, esports was one of our new leaders on campus. So that we went to them and then we gave them this 3-hour VINIVAL workshop, and they were so engaged, they were so positive about it, so sex positive about it. So we were really encouraged to go back and do this workshop again. So they actually invited us to come back next month or this month in a couple of weeks to do the workshop again. Mm-hmm.
So there's one answer to why DePaul, because of our values at DePaul, to start to move the the needle of inclusion in esports.
Very nice.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and you had a question?
Yes, thanks. Thanks for your great remarks. Since you're a pioneer in computing and in the field, did you foresee, or how much of today's ubiquitous computing, and a lot of it is a lot more user-friendly than it was, and it's mobile, and people of all technical proficiencies are using it. How much of that did you foresee, or anything surprise you about those developments?
Okay. So I can answer that question of what did I foresee with an anecdote. So turn the clock back to 1983. A couple startups are coming out of Data General. One of them's Alliant Computer, making mini supercomputers. The first commercial, my claim for fame, first commercial parallel processor. I go to join Alliant. My husband goes to work for a company called Banyan Systems, 5th employee there, doing personal computer networking. I'm like, well, thank God one of us has a good job in this family, because where are you going to go networking these little toys together? There's no future in networking PCs, but I have a job building real iron. So there's the answer to how much I foresaw. No, and to take that seriously too. I think it is. I look very specifically at where some of my strengths and that are. I can get anything out the door. I can manage any project out the door. But I'm not your visionary. I'm not the Steve Jobs. And it's funny because even as Alliant was, and not just the company, our whole market space was falling away as we were putting personal computers on our own desks at work. We didn't see how that was going to take over. And there's probably a big lesson there too, is you ignore disruptions. I didn't see a personal computer as a disruption, and my entire industry no longer exists. Most of you probably never even heard of mini computers or mini supercomputers, because that industry just doesn't exist. So I guess the final answer is, don't come to me for vision and technology. We have some great faculty back here. Yes.
What do you think are the most marketable tech skills right now?
Oh, you know what? I think I'm going to answer this very briefly, and then we're going to go back to the panel. It's infinite. And I think what you're going to see from our panel is the diversity of tech skills that are valuable. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find an area of technology or a skill in technology that isn't in demand somewhere. So I believe to some extent, life is too short and the work week is too long to get up on Monday morning and do something you don't like. No weekend and no amount of money is going to make up for a miserable Monday through Friday. So if there's something you love to do, you'll be successful in it.
There's been a lot of comments about how we can really make some impact moving forward. And the DePaul School of Design had a talk by Antoinette Carroll. She was about diversity and leadership in design. And she had, I thought, a great point. She said that when you feel alone in an organization, when you feel like you're battling alone, look outside the organization for groups that are putting larger pressure on, and join them and work your strength that way.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was a great point, and she's had a lot of success that way.
Yeah, and I'll repeat that very briefly, which is if you're feeling alone, feeling isolated, look for groups outside that are having impact and become a part of that. American Association of University Women does amazing things. And I think the other interesting thing coming from a design perspective too is we're tech people talking to tech people, but talk to other disciplines too, and other professions, because you get a lot of insights there. But I totally agree. There's always strength in finding a community that you can be a part of that will reinforce that. Okay, with that. Oh,
can I butt in?
Sure.
Hey. I heard some question about stuff that happened in '79 and it's still happening. You hinted at the responsibility we all have once we make it.
Mm-hmm.
Can we get a commitment from the room?
Oh.
Stand up if you're willing to mentor someone younger than you, or when you make it big, you're gonna mentor someone. They don't have to be women, they have to be people whose voice is not, heard, and teach your daughters and sons how this should work. Come on, stand up.
Point that I wanted to make as well, because sometimes the conversation goes like somebody else is going to do it, and then we'll
Yes.
benefit. But it is up to every one of us to be aware of it and make those changes. And one thing that came out of our talk earlier this week was, what if we look at it as cultural differences, right? And when I got my first MBA or first master's, it was an MBA and it was international. So we got a lot of training in cultural practices and different things, but it was to be ready to go work in another country. And you're working in another country, you know that they're different and I'm different, and you're explaining how your culture is and they explain theirs, and then you work along. Well, what if we relate to whatever it is, put that all in the same, and think, oh, I can teach people how I work because my culture is different, whatever it is, and I can ask questions and learn about how their culture works. And I think those kind of conversations, it's okay to tell people, this is how I am, this is how I operate, this is what works well for me, what works well for you, and then let's figure out what we can do together, and that's really gonna move things forward. And it can be someone from the South, someone from a different color, different gender. Like, if we approach them all like might be a cultural difference, and let's work on that, then I think you can see some real change.
And have the courage to have the awkward conversations.
Yes.
Because they are awkward, but they're what makes the difference too.
All right, so we take a break. There's food, snacks. The bathrooms, remember,